So let me introduce the English speaker here today. Actually, a couple days ago, we got a telephone call from Kaklam Temple. This is Bhante Kovida, quite familiar Sinhala name. Then, I like to visit your temple. Then, a monk came to our temple. A non-Sri Lankan monk, but he was in Sri Lanka. This is Bhante Kovida, who has associated Most Venerable Malangona Ananda Maitreya there also, who lived in Sri Lanka for a few years. I think before 23 years ago. And I was talking with Bhante Kovida and I asked, "Where you reside, Bhante?" He said, "Nowhere. I'm homeless." He's a good traveler. Mostly monks should be homeless. But we are homeowners now. So Bhante Kovida is a preacher and he's a well-known monk, but unfortunately we didn't know. But I'm lucky to have him here, and fortunate to have him here. I would kindly invite Bhante Kovida to present his sermon, and if you have anything to know about him, I would welcome Bhante to introduce himself too. Please say sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yes, I grew up on the tropical island of Jamaica, West Indies, south of Cuba. It was a former British colony. I grew up as a Christian because we only had Christianity at that time in Jamaica, but I wasn't very satisfied with Christianity because I was asking too many questions. So I came to Ontario to study, but I wasn't satisfied with my life in Canada, so I went to India. This was 1975, and that was the best thing I did. I had very profound experiences and awakening, and I came upon the Buddha Dhamma in India. That was 1975. And then a few years later, I got a chance to do some social development work in Sri Lanka, funded by the Canadian government. So this was 87, 88, 89. And then I met some Western monks, and then they introduced me to Venerable Balangoda Ananda Maitreya. I was very fortunate to meet him, because he spoke very good English, very humble, very kind. And what was unique about him, not only was he this incredible scholar, and he spoke many languages, but he was also a practitioner, a meditation practitioner. Because most scholars don't practice. They're just academic monks, but he was very different. And he was a true spiritual seeker. And he had been to India many, many times, traveling all over, meeting spiritual people of all backgrounds, not only Buddhist. He was extremely open-minded, and he just loved to read. Anyway, we have limited time, but as what Hamduru says afterwards, we can have a discussion. Those who would like to have a discussion in the next room, so there are chairs there. Now, what I would like to speak about is something very interesting, and it's about the qualities of the Buddha, the three qualities of the Buddha, and our human mental defilements. Kilesa, what we call kilesa. Mental defilements, mental pollution that causes dukkha, causes conflict in our lives, in relationship. And there's a very interesting relationship between or mental defilements, kilesa, and the qualities of the Buddha. Because as you know, the Buddha himself, Siddhartha Gautama, had to make tremendous effort to purify his mind of these mental defilements. Because as human beings, we all have mental defilements. Because it's a part of our human conditioning, our human education. And as you may know, our main defilement, kilesa, is ignorance and delusion. Ignorance and delusion. And ignorance is especially pertaining to the strong attachment to self, to ego, the idea of I, me, and mine. Now we all have this. So we all have a sense of self. But what the Buddha realized was that the self that we are so attached to was only a conditioning in the mind. That's all. He was the first person to have this insight. Because the belief in a permanent, concrete, separate and independent self, in Western, some people in the West call it a soul, but an ego personality. This is a very ancient belief in human civilization. All the ancient civilizations believe in this permanent self. And from that belief came the belief in reincarnation. That when the body dies, this permanent, solid, fixed, separate entity will be reborn into a new body. Very, very ancient belief. So the Buddha was the first person to have this profound insight that the self is not something permanent, not something concrete, fixed, and not something which is separate and independent from the rest of nature. Very, very profound, and you can imagine when he began to teach the teaching of anatta, non-self, most people could not understand it. Even most monks could not understand it. Because it is a very profound insight. And because we are so strongly attached to self, especially in, say, North American society, because people tend to be more individualistic than, say, people in Asia. Because Asia, the sense of family and community is much stronger than most families in North America. So we all have a sense of self, but it is the strong attachment to self that causes suffering, conflict, and all the different problems in relationship. In other words, when we take ourselves too seriously, then we have a lot of conflict. Because out of that comes, pride, arrogance, conceit. And when we take ourselves too seriously, we also have a lot of fear and insecurity. And we're always worried about what people are thinking and talking about us. We're never secure. And delusion is something which our minds are constantly subjected to. So that's why the main kilesa, the main defilement, is ignorance and delusion. So I'll go more into detail about the nature of delusion. So from ignorance and delusion comes self-centered craving and attachment. Self-centered craving and attachment. And craving includes all types of desire, expectation, envy, of course greed, and so on. And of course, the attachment in the human mind is very strong, the clinging mind. And this is why you often hear the term learning to let go. In Dhamma practice, learning to let go. Because the clinging mind is very, very strong. And there's a reason why it is so strong. Because it's related to thinking and memory. Thinking and memory. Because thinking is related to memory. To past experience, to knowledge, information. And our third defilement are all our negative mental states. Aversion, hatred, ill will, jealousy, resentment, disrespect, and so on. Now we have these defilements because of our condition. As human beings, we're all conditioned. Our brains have been programmed first to label, to judge, criticize, compare, to condemn, to like or not to like, to want or not to want, and of course to have aversion, hatred, ill will, and so on. So it is this conditioning that we all have as human beings to varying degrees that gives the idea of a permanent self. That the I is at the center of the world and is so important. Now when we look at the Buddha's life, you see that there are three qualities that stand out. And the first quality is wisdom and mindfulness. Wisdom and mindfulness, because they go together. Present moment, awareness, attention. And wisdom, of course, is to have right understanding of the human mind, the human condition. And from wisdom and mindfulness comes simplicity and renunciation. Simplicity and renunciation. And the third quality, of course, is loving kindness and compassion. Metta, karuna, loving kindness, compassion. And with loving kindness and compassion also comes sympathetic joy and equanimity. Mudita and upekkha. Now when we look at the Buddha's qualities and we look at our human defilements, kilesa, you see that there's a very interesting relationship. You see that wisdom and mindfulness is the medicine, the antidote for ignorance and delusion. Wisdom and mindfulness is the medicine or the antidote for ignorance and delusion. Wisdom overcomes ignorance, and mindfulness, sati, satipatthana, overcomes delusion. And we see that simplicity and renunciation is the medicine or the antidote for craving and attachment. Simplicity helps us to overcome craving, greed, wanting, jealousy, and so on. And of course, renunciation helps us to overcome attachment, clinging. And of course, we see that loving kindness and compassion, metta, karuna, is the medicine, the antidote for aversion, hatred, ill will, resentment, jealousy, and so on. Very interesting relationship. Now, as we said, wisdom is to have the right understanding. And right understanding is to understand that self is not something which is permanent, concrete, separate, independent. It is really just a, how do you say, it's a social label that we use when we say I, or the word mama in Sinhalese. Because as human beings, we have to use language and we have to use labels, I, you, he, she, and so on. It's like we need names because names are just social labels. But we tend to forget, especially in North America, that names are just labels. So if you forget somebody's name or you call somebody, another name by mistake, many people will get very upset, especially in North America, because they are so attached to names. They identify so strongly with names. Just like when we use the word I to speak, we think this I is something real, something solid. But actually, it is just a label. So the Buddha said when we investigate, we begin to see the three characteristics of existence. That things are anicca, things are impermanent, constantly changing. And because things are constantly changing, they are unsatisfactory, uncertain. And of course, the most profound realization was anatta, non-self. That self is only a conditioning in the mind, based on thinking and the use of language and memory. And of course, mindfulness is what helps us, satipatthana, to overcome delusion. And there are different aspects to delusion. One aspect is from thinking, from too much thinking. Because you find in the human condition, we tend to think too much. Of course, we need to think in daily life for practical purposes. We need rational, logical thinking. That's obvious. But you find that even when we don't need to think, the mind keeps thinking unnecessarily. I'm sure you've noticed that. The mind is like a machine that doesn't know when to stop thinking. And that's why we're deluded by too much thinking, too much mental activity. And you can see from your own experience that thinking can easily become very irrational, very illogical, when it becomes very obsessive, right? And worrying is a good example. Or you keep thinking about the past and regretting. Or you're having a problem or a conflict and you find that thinking becomes very repetitive. You keep thinking over and over and over this problem or a conflict. And the more you think about this problem or conflict, somehow this problem or the conflict seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Have you noticed that? And before you know it, you have this big melodrama. You've created this big melodrama out of obsessive thinking. And a good way of looking at it is like you start with a small flame and you keep adding paper and wood and oil, and the flame just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have this big roaring fire out of control. Our minds are like that. When our thoughts become too obsessive, too repetitive. So that's one aspect of delusion, of moha. And of course, there are some people, they cannot control their minds because they have no awareness, no mindfulness, and they get so angry, so confused, so unbalanced that they end up doing crazy, irrational things. The power of delusion, of moha. Another aspect of delusion is, again, just our habit of always reacting. We are always reacting from early childhood, right? Everything we experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, we're always reacting. Judging, comparing, criticizing, condemning, liking, not liking, wanting, not wanting. Somebody says something very pleasant to you, you're very happy, right? But if somebody says something unpleasant, or they criticize you, or sometimes just the way you look, or what you're wearing, you get very upset. It's an aspect of delusion. And that's why one of the essential teachings of the Buddha is, when you see, just see. When you hear, just hear. This teaching sounds very simple, but as you know, it's very challenging, very difficult to practice. Because we're always reacting. Always. From childhood. And of course, there were examples in the Buddha's life where he was being challenged, or people got very angry with him, and he was able to keep very calm, despite being abused, and so on. So that's another aspect of delusion, or a constant habit of reacting. And of course, another aspect is our minds love to create stories and little dramas, like the soap operas on television. Yeah. And worries and fears and anxieties. And we think these mind-created stories and little dramas and fears, we think it's true. They seem very real, don't they? Because the mind is actually like a television screen. But when we apply mindfulness, present moment awareness, we begin to see that they're only thoughts. They're only thoughts and images. They're not permanent, solid reality. They only seem that way. Because the power of the mind, of thoughts and images, is so strong. The power of delusion. And this is why there's a very good technique. It's called mental noting. Where when you're caught up in a story or a drama or a fear, you just say in your mind, only thinking, thinking, thinking. I don't know if you've heard about this technique, because I've used this myself. Only thinking, thinking, thinking. And you come back to mindfulness, whether it's breathing or walking or any kind of mindfulness. It's a very useful technique, because when you can note mindfully thinking, 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 it helps you to get out of the story or the drama or the fear, and it makes you realize it's only thinking. That's all, it's only thinking. It's very liberating. It helps us to get out of the contents of those thoughts and images. And most of our fears are created by thinking and the power of the imagination. So this mental labeling is very useful. Only thinking, thinking, thinking. I'm just curious, how many people here have difficulty with the breathing meditation, anapanasati, mindful. How many people? Okay. Afterwards, I'll show you a very simple mindfulness practice that's very easy. And especially when you cannot focus your mind or you're having obsessive thoughts. Because you find that even people with experience, myself included, sometimes I'll sit, but for some reason I just can't focus my mind. Because that's the nature of the mind. But there's this one practice that is so easy, and you move your hands in a rhythm, and it's it's very easy to focus in the present moment. And I'll give you the video. The video is on YouTube also. It's called Dynamic Meditation. And the other name on internet is Mahasati Meditation. Mahasati, which means great mindfulness. And your mindfulness becomes very clear, very sharp, and you can look at all that crazy thinking that the mind is doing, and you can let them go. You see that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not a solid reality. Likewise, when we have unpleasant memories, right? And we all have unpleasant memories. And you'll notice that when you remember those unpleasant memories, they seem so real, don't they? So permanent, so solid. And we identify very strongly with these unpleasant memories. And sometimes even emotions will arise. Upset, anger, regret, and so on. Even something that happened a long, long time ago, the emotions will still arise. Because that's the nature of the mind. But when we apply mindfulness, we begin to realize that even these unpleasant memories, they're only thoughts and images that are happening in the present moment. They're only thoughts and images that are happening in the present moment. Only thinking, thinking, thinking. And it's very liberating when we can realize that. Because there's only the present moment. And likewise, what we consider the future, again, are just thoughts, images, and some ideas that are happening now in the present moment. That's all. Now, it doesn't mean that we cannot make plans or have certain goals regarding the future. Of course, it's very natural. But the important thing is that those future goals and plans that we have, they should only be tentative. Do you understand that word, tentative? Only flexible ideas. You should not become too attached, too obsessed with these future goals and plans. Because if we become too attached, too obsessed with future goals and plans, of course, we experience a lot of fear and anxiety and uncertainty. The fear of not achieving, not what you'd like to achieve in the future. It's very important. And this is why the practice of mindfulness, sati, is so important. Now, simplicity means, of course, in the Buddha's time, or if you're living a life of like a forest monk, it's very easy to be simple. Because you're far away from shopping centers, and you don't have a credit card. But with practice and understanding, we can still practice the spirit of simplicity in our modern world, despite the shopping centers and the credit card. But simplicity simply means to be content, to have gratitude for what we have. And with that comes mindfulness, so we can become more calm. And you find that when we're more calm, we have less craving, less desire. Because when the mind is very restless, very confused, it's very easy for desires, cravings, expectation to arise. All right, don't they? Very easy. And of course, with mindfulness, even when desires arrive, we can look at it and see it objectively and let it go. Because normally we say, we identify with a desire or a craving, and we say, oh, I want this thing, or I must have this thing. Right? And of course we believe that if we can only get what we want, we will be permanently happy. And if I cannot get what I want, I'm going to be unhappy, miserable for the rest of my life. But of course, it's just an illusion. Because there's no such thing as permanent happiness. Likewise, permanent unhappiness. Everything we experience, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, are impermanent, only changing conditions of the mind. So we can practice simplicity, the spirit of simplicity, even in our modern consumer society. And of course, with mindfulness again, we're able to look at attachments. The mind clinging to unpleasant memories, to conflicts. And this is why the clinging mind is so strong, because it's related to thinking and memory. And this is why somebody once said, happiness is having good health and a bad memory. The ability, to forget, to let go of unpleasant memories. But another aspect of clinging is, the idea of possession. My family, my friends, my house, my job, my knowledge, my experiences, my this, mine. And of course, my body. This includes my body. But as you know, with Dhamma reflection, you begin to see that even this body, it does not belong to me. It's not me, not mine. It belongs to nature, changing conditions of nature. It's not me, not mine. For example, if you tell the body not to get sick, does the body listen to us? It doesn't. The body will get sick due to certain conditions. If you tell the body not to get hungry, not to get tired, not to get sleepy, not to go to washroom, the body does these things whether we like it or not. It follows its own natural laws. And if you tell the body not to get old, not to die, you see the body will age and it will die. Because it belongs to the changing conditions of nature. It is anatta, non-self. So this is a very important teaching. Of course, we have to take care of the body as much as we can, but we cannot get too attached to it, because it is only a temporary shelter. And it's composed of the elements. We don't have time to go into the elements, but the elements are there. Earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness. So I will end here because we have limited time, and I'll be very happy to continue for those who are interested outside. So I offer this for your reflection. So may you all be well, happy, and peaceful.